Hello, Tarrence, and hello, everyone, for this new episode of Struck, where we talk about tech in general and ZK rollups in specific, and we talk about stuff that get us interested. With me today, I have Tarrence from Cartridge. Hello, Tarrence.
Hey, Henri. Thank you for having me.
Please, a pleasure to talk with you. So, Tarrence, let's dive right into it. Can you tell us a bit more about you? What are you working on at Cartridge?
Sure. Yeah. So we're working on the StarkNet gaming console at Cartridge, and what that means is basically, and we're going to talk a little bit about maybe like the story of how we got here. But Cartridge is basically building horizontal gaming infrastructure for blockchain games on top of StarkNet. And there's a lot of common components that games need, especially when you want to start taking advantage of the shared context of the blockchain. Around like player identity, user interactions, distributions, and then some of the more interesting stuff around modding and stuff like that, that we're very interested in surfacing to players and providing for APIs and infrastructure to help game developers more easily take advantage of these things.
So like a gaming SDK, is that it?
Yeah. I mean, I think like if you have built a game for different platforms in the past, like if you look at StarkNet as like a platform, right? Like similar to Xbox or PlayStation or like Nintendo Switch or something. When you build a game on those platforms, there's a set of APIs that come with the platform, right? For Xbox, for example, you have like some predefined like way of interacting with games, the controller that comes with it. You have like player identity, which is the profiles. You usually have some kind of requesting reward system that is implemented at the platform level that users can build up like an identity over time by playing different games. You have like distribution channels that games can take advantage of. And then you generally have like lower level SDK APIs and stuff like that that makes developing on those platforms easier. So like we're at Cartridge, we're looking at like what that looks like for a blockchain, like when the blockchain is a platform, right? In this case, StarkNet in particular, like how can we provide things that abstract the way that people interact with games that are on top of StarkNet? How can we take advantage of the fact that you have like the shared context of the blockchain, which allows you to create like very powerful primitives around player identity that you can take your achievements and the things that you've done over time, and you can aggregate them across games, and they're portable between different gaming ecosystems. How can we help games onboard new players like very easily? There's obviously a lot of overhead right now in onboarding people into the blockchain ecosystem, and so like one of the things that we're focused on, especially in the short term, is onboarding players. Getting them the things that they need to play the game. In a lot of cases, that's like a very simple wallet, maybe like some funding for that wallet, potentially some assets. Some games require you to purchase some assets, or you might want to loan some assets, or they might just mint you some assets for free, like a player, like some kind of, it could be a ERC 721, it could be like some representation of something that the player needs to do before they can actually play a game. So facilitating that process, just making it so that you can pull up a game, you can see a link to a tweet to a game on a tweet, click it, and be playing it within like the next 20 seconds kind of thing, rather than going through like a bunch of different hoops and hurdles to start playing the game.
Well, it sounds like what you're building is not necessarily, well, maybe I didn't get it wrong, but like it's mostly dedicated, like it's developer focused. It's not necessarily you're clicking on the link on Twitter and then you get to play the game, as much as it is you're a game developer and you want to develop something on StarkNet and you don't have to rewrite a lot of concepts and a lot of things that other game developers will have to do it, right? Or is it also, or am I misleaded there? You want to build both way for like the, let's say, Steam part for the users of the video game and the Xbox API part, like you described earlier, for the game developers? You want to do both or mostly one?
Yeah, so right now we're kind of operating on both sides to an extent, right? So on like the player side, we have the cartridge controller and the arcade, which is around like player identity and distribution of like interacting with games, like getting people into the ecosystem and working with a few different games in the ecosystem around like making it super easy for people to interact with games. So like for example, Influence had this test to earn event. Maybe a couple months ago. And in order to interact with the game, there was like this like long wiki page of like 15 steps, and then the 16th step was like play the game. And one of the goals in that case is like to compress that into just a single step, right? Like so, like if you sign up with Cartridge, we take advantage of WebAuthn, which means that you can sign transactions with the secure element that's embedded in your device, like on a desktop or on your mobile application. So you don't have to worry about like provisioning private public key pairs and stuff like that. It's all done at the platform level. And once you have like that taken care of, which is traditionally like one of the bigger challenges in the ecosystem,
It is.
um, yeah. So once you have that taken care of, the user doesn't have to worry about like how they're going to lose it, if they're going to lose it, and stuff like that. And especially in the case where the user is just very new to the ecosystem. So like kind of the approach that we've been taking um, is that like Cartridge is a wallet to the extent that's necessary to onboard new users, but we don't want to like position ourselves as like a competitor, for example, to like Argent. Like I think like when a user first comes into the ecosystem, they want to be able to do things, and they're not too worried about like the security of it, although it will be a secure thing, but they're not too worried about like all of these different things that Argent is very focused on, like social recovery and fraud detection and all of these like deeper concepts that like later maybe you become like once you are once you've been like stark pilled or whatever, and you're operating the ecosystem and you're starting to aggregate some assets, and you're maybe like, okay, maybe I should get like the Argent security module. And because and this is something that we've been working on in collaboration with them, because and sorry, this is a little bit of a tangent, but with the plugin account architecture, we're able to do that in a complementary way. So we can issue a user a wallet like just in the very early days, and then later they can transition it to something that's more powerful or maybe more secure, or has like some more constraints around it as it aggregates some value. So that's like one area where we interact with the player themselves. And then on
I see what you mean.
the
So
game,
wait, so you're saying, yeah, to sum up what you're saying is you're taking, like, I think you haven't said it yet, but I think you're leveraging a lot account abstraction. It's the buzzword of the
yeah,
moment. Everyone is about like account abstraction and how it's a game changer. What I really like is that what you're doing is very concrete on that matter. Like you're taking full advantage of it to, as you said, make it easier for newcomers to join in and for them to be able to port and phase out what they did when they didn't care that much about security and port it into a more secure environment, because that's what you're describing, right? Which is
no,
like,
100%.
so that I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I think, obviously to your point, like abstraction is a big buzzword of the moment. I mean, it's really not, it's like it's a powerful concept. But it's got a lot of mind share right now. I don't know if it's really that interesting at the end of the day, but like things that you can build with it are quite interesting. And like StarkNet is, I think, where like a lot of this experimentation is happening with the Argent and the Ledger team, and what we're working on at Cartridge. And I think it's going to fundamentally change the way that people think about like what is a wallet, right? You put like
Yeah.
a lot more power into the user's hand, like portability between platforms, like with externally owned account, like infrastructure is very monolithic, right? Like very rarely do people switch between MetaMask and then like take your seed phrase out of there. And in theory, you can just paste it into like a Rainbow wallet and have it on mobile, but like very rarely does that happen.
You're right, and
Whereas,
also, and
yeah,
also, we can talk about interoperability in that sense, but there's not, oh, I'm gonna take my ability to sign and use it using, my UB key, or using my cell phone hardware device or my WebAuthn component, like you mentioned before, right? Because the cryptography is just not there. If I understand correctly, I'm not a full professional on that, but basically, in order to sign an Ethereum transaction, you need to use a specific version of a signing algorithm, right? So signing algorithm allows you to sign transactions, and then Ethereum is made to use one specific set of parameters, which is called a curve, right? And you can use this to sign a transaction, but that's the only curve you can use. And one of the big advantages of so this has a disadvantage, and the disadvantage is that signing is something that other devices can do. Your cell phone, your like basically anything that is connected today has the ability to assign something, but they don't necessarily have the ability to sign it with the same curve that Ethereum is able to interpret. Now, with account of traction, you're able to say, well, I can authenticate somebody with the Ethereum curve or with that other curve or with that other curve. And that's what allows you to basically interact with the chain with a lot of other devices that already know how to sign stuff, not the exact same way. Just not the exact same way we were used to it. So that's how you guys did the WebAuthn authentication that allows you to sign with Face ID to claim an NFT. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So like, because account abstraction, basically it means that the smart contract can implement the logic that validates the transaction signature, right? And so to your point, Ethereum has like a very particular curve. It's P256K1. And then, like StarkNet obviously has its own curve. But because StarkNet supports account abstraction, you can implement and there's been a lot of validation of different curves that have been implemented by the community in the StarkNet ecosystem. And so you can have different curves that you validate. So it could be, in the case of what we're doing with WebAuthn, like WebAuthn is basically like an industry standard specification for how to sign and attest to different credentials it's specifically designed for the browser, supported across platforms. And it itself supports different curves as well, and it gives you a JSON data structure, and it's extensible, and it will describe, this is an attestation. It's using this particular signing algorithm. So the most common one is called P256. And that's like SEP-P256R1. So very similar to Ethereum, just with a different set of constants. There's someone in the community implemented validation of those signatures. So we're taking advantage of that. But you could also use, for example, RSA signature verification inside of WebAuthn for transaction signature verification on StarkNet. So I know we don't have this in the US, but I think Marcelo mentioned at one point, in the EU, you guys have ID cards that have RSA signers inside of them. And so you could, in theory, have an account on StarkNet that you can sign a transaction with a physical European Union ID card by using NFC, for example. Which could be quite interesting. Maybe it could be just a two-factor authentication, because now you can have with account abstraction, you can also have more complex authorization schemes that are more similar to traditional authorization schemes. You might have two-factor. I mean, this is what Argent does with Guardians, and you can incorporate all these devices. So you can have you can have your iPhone device, you can have a local signer, you can have your ID card, you can have your YubiKey, you can have your ledger, and all of these things can sign transactions from the same account. So it's going to be quite powerful. It's the authorization logic that's possible.
I think that's what really makes me there are two sides to that you can think of that are really interesting. There's the security side, right? You get a lot more devices you can use and a lot more schemes you can use, and so you can have more security by adding different layers of protections and different signing mechanism. But there's also the other side to that, which is you can plug into almost any design in a very simple way. And so you can also make it that simple. You can just go where people are and use the way they are used to interacting with a website or with their cell phone or whatever, and use this mechanism to bring them on chain in a fully custodian nature. in fully
Yeah.
custodian, in a fully self-custodian nature. And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
I agree with you.
so that's one side. You're building a lot of stuff for the users, and you're also building the other side, which is for game developers. What you
Hmm.
described, sort of set of APIs, just similar to what you would have developing on Xbox. Let's take a step back here. I'm curious. Why did you focus on video game? What's your background?
Sure. I mean, so like the video game background obviously starts when I was like, 10 years old and playing Diablo and doing LANs, playing Counter-Strike 1.6 with my friends. And it kind of been like, quite being a gamer my whole life, building, different things in the space. But I didn't go like fully into the gaming ecosystem. Like I took some game development courses at Michigan when I was studying computer science there. And I built some games just for fun. But didn't really go like further into like the game ecosystem until like a few years later. I took a more traditional software engineering route out of college, which was
What
just
did you
like
What did you do out of college?
I joined a company called Box in Silicon Valley, and so I was doing full stack development application stuff there, which was a great experience. I learned a lot about like good engineering and stuff like that. I
Hmm.
spent a few years there, and then I joined Magic Leap as part of like Magic Leap is a mixed reality device.
Wait, I remember Magic Leap. They had this amazing trailer with a lot of high schoolers in a gymnasium. They were watching a whale jump and fall down. It
Yeah,
looked
yeah,
amazing.
yeah. I can show you one second. I actually have. I don't know if people see the video of this, but I have like
They won't, but I will.
the I have like the mixed reality glasses still. See,
Wow,
they
so
look like
cool.
this.
Really
You put
nice.
them on
Kind of
like
looks like
that.
the Anakin Skywalker helmet when he's, with his pod in Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like it was obviously like the technology was overhyped, like or oversold by the demonstrations. I mean, part of it was because the company, like, there's a version of like mixed reality that's possible on like these big rigs, and then there's a version that you can like compress into a headset that people can wear. Even still, like the experience on the device is very cool and like something you've never seen before of like projecting like 3D into the world around you, like virtual objects. But yeah, so like like while I was at Magic Leap, it was kind of more of an extension of my interest in like video games, where I was working on the advanced research team. And part of what we were working on is, in order to power a device like this, the device has to be very like contextually aware of the world around you. And so I was developing and studying deep learning algorithms for a few different problems. Like one of them was 3D world reconstruction. So basically taking the sensors on your head and then building like a 3D representation of it around the user in real time, which was a lot of fun. So like spent a lot of time just going deep on like computer graphics and all these kind of things. And then like more recently, I got involved with like the Dope Wars, or me and a friend of mine, Dennis and Bertram, like launched the Dope Wars ecosystem. Um, and that was a derivative of Loot, but more geared towards like street culture, based on this calculator game that we all played when we were very young, which was basically like a drug arbitrage game. It's one of the oldest games ever made, one of the most popular games ever made.
Yeah, I remember
And
playing it on my calculator also. But wait,
yeah.
how did you get into blockchain?
Oh, so blockchain. I got involved in the blockchain space while I was at Michigan.
Hmm.
So it was around like 2013. A friend of mine, he started telling me about Bitcoin. Um, yeah, I grew up in South Africa and I moved to the US in 2005. And so a lot of the things that uh, Bitcoin was talking about like resonated with me immediately, just because I had been in a country like South Africa with a currency that was being devalued, with like instability, with the in like South Africa also has like currency control. So when my family moved to the U.S., we it was very hard for us to like we basically restarted from zero. Like the wealth that we had built in South Africa didn't translate at all to the US. Like one, because of like the difference in purchasing power, but also because of exchange controls and the ability to like
Hmm.
um, to send funds across. So he was telling me a bit about Bitcoin, and I was like very fascinated by this like concept of its own sovereign kind of currency, like not like controlled by any particular jurisdiction.
Yeah, you perceive
Um,
Bitcoin and Ethereum much differently when you've been facing inflation, hyperinflation, or capital control, whereas when you're not, it's really interesting. Sometimes it's really hard to convey the value of this to people who live in the global West because we don't feel this that much. But for a lot of people in the world, it's much more concrete, right? And
mhm,
it's a lot of the value where people are in Europe are like, but why? People get it
mhm,
much faster when they come from other parts of the world.
definitely, definitely. Um, yeah, so that's why I started getting involved in the Bitcoin space, and then I built a few things with Bitcoin. I built like very early on. I built. I was fascinated by like multi sigs in Bitcoin and the ability, like to build something very similar to what like Argent has today, where you have, and I think there was someone else building this back then, like in 2014, 2015 time frame of where you have like a centralized server that like attests to transaction and does like fraud detection. So it uses signs a transaction, and then it's like two of three. And then you have like some centralized party that signs off on it based on like some parameters. I built like I think it's still on my GitHub today. It's called like Bit Wallet or something, like a implementation
Nice.
of that in Swift just for fun. And then I got involved in like Ethereum ecosystem in like 2015. I started like, initially was like a skeptic just mostly because I was coming from the Bitcoin side and so many people had been like kind of reinforcing this idea. But it eventually like kind of broke out of that and recognized what Ethereum was doing was super cool. And then yeah, like kind of stayed involved mostly on the side for quite a few years, just building things, side projects, just for fun. Um, in 2017, I started a project called Common Interest, which was building DAO tooling and infrastructure using like a primitive that was quite popular back there called TCRs. To
Oh
basically like
yeah, TCRs were the account abstraction of today. Like
yeah,
everybody was
yeah,
talking
could
about
be,
them and
could
they
be.
could solve everything.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Which I still think TCRs I mean, I think like TCRs have are expressed in different ways in blockchain in smart contract protocols today, just maybe less um,
TCRs for
like
people
concrete.
listening is token created registries.
Yeah, yeah, and basically the idea of a TCR, I mean, like very basic, like very simply, is it's like a list that people can like stake tokens on in order to like order that list, and so you can like have some level of importance to things, or you can like attest to like different pieces of this list by staking your tokens, and then like based on like this like economic incentive structure, you can be rewarded uh, if like everyone agrees with you, or maybe you're slashed if people disagree with you. And there's this idea of like this like collaborative curation of a list
And
basically.
fun tangent on that. I think the first term TCR, token curated registry, was put in words by Simon de la Rouvière, who is also
Mm-hmm.
from South Africa. And he's
Yeah,
also the
yeah.
guy who came up with what to me sounds the first version of optimistic rollups, which was called, I forgot the
Plasma.
name. I'm sorry?
No, or
No,
plasma, no.
no, it
Before
was,
plasma.
I think it was before Plasma or around the same time. It would bit something. Basically, the ability to basically write a function and you provide the result, but somebody has time to claim that, nope, this is not how you should go with this.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, it's like
And
the interactive.
yeah,
Uh, oh my god, yeah, which is actually what optimism has moved to now with like
it
the
is.
interactive fraud detection. Yeah, I forget the name too. I actually, yeah, when I was in 2017, I was in New York City, like part of the crypto scene here. Those guys were there quite often. They raised the whole TrueBit.
True bit, exactly. Nice, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, um, yeah. I think it's still around, actually. Like
It is.
what's crypto never dies. Yeah, but yeah, Simon is a great dude. I met him a couple times. Yeah, he's. I mean, if people haven't heard about Simon De La Rubia, you should definitely go look him up. He's like, he used to be a lot more active, but like very, comes up, has like a lot of very interesting ideas, and his blog posts, have kind of been like very foundational, especially to a lot of like the NFT scene, which is something that I feel like has been thinking quite deeply about for a very long time.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry, it was a small tangent. So after Magic Leap, you went on to start. Sorry, the video game with.
Oh, Magic Leap.
No,
Yeah,
after
Dope
Magic Leap,
Wars.
yeah, Dope
Yeah,
Wars, exactly, the drug
Dope
selling
Wars.
video game.
Yeah. So Dope Wars was like a lot of fun. We basically like Denison. My son was just born like 2 weeks earlier. I was hanging out with my wife and Casey at the park, and Denison messaged me, and he's like, "Hey, I think we should do like a loot fork, but based on like street culture, like more like GTA. So instead of like a wand, you have like an AK-47." And I was like, "Oh my god, this is a great idea. You got to give me like 5 minutes." And I just ran and grabbed my computer, and I was just like there with with my newly born son, and we were just like putting together smart contracts. I mean, a lot of the community, like, it was kind of crazy. He like sent the tweet, and then like thousands of people joined into the Discord, and then there was like the Google Doc. I think it was like by Paul Meckler of PM, was driving the curation of all the items, and in like 30 minutes there was like this whole new ecosystem born, and we deployed the token, and it was a free to mint NFT. Like the 8,000 tokens were minted out, and like it was in like a couple minutes or whatever. It was like one of the top gas consumers of the day. It was a really cool experience. But as
This is
part of
really
like,
interesting, like this moment of collective euphoria,
yeah,
focused on one task, and then you ship something. It's really cool.
and and it's something so uniquely enabled by the blockchain, right? Like
Exactly.
you can spin up something like that collaboratively and so quickly, and in like with like an hour or so, uh, you have thousands of people in a Discord like with these tokens, and everyone, So like one of the things that we did with Dope Horse was we said 10% of, we wanted to create a DAO. So Denison is the founder of Tally, Tally.xyz, which is like fully on-chain DAOs, and they've been working on that for quite a while. And so like one of his big interests was in making Dope Boys an actual DAO and kind of like seeing how far we can push it. And so we had 10% of all secondary market sales went into the DAO's treasury, which was controlled by like the 8,000 token holders themselves, so they could vote on what was done with those funds. And this was, quite peak NFT hype cycle. So there was a lot of trading happening, and the DAO accumulated like over $1 million in ETH in the first week.
Whoa.
And so like all of a sudden you had this like DAO. In a week, you had like a DAO where it had thousands of stakeholders. They could control this treasury of $1 million. And now we were trying to figure out like what to spend it on and what to fund and stuff like that. And the DAO started funding a lot of really cool stuff. Like one of them, we built the Dope DAO funded like a mixtape. There's a guy, Shecky Green, who is one of the co-founders of Source Magazine, which is like like a very old school hip hop culture kind of magazine. And he was friends with like, we hung out with like Biggie Smalls and Tupac and all these guys, or whatever. And he was involved. He got interested in the scene. He like was interested in crypto. And he was like, I have great connections in the music industry. Like, let's like fund the creation of a mixtape. So there's like a Dope Horse mixtape that you can actually listen with DJ Green Lantern, who's a
So
DJ that's
cool.
done like a bunch of stuff with like Eminem and stuff, which is really cool. We funded the kind of illustration of all the artwork, and I built out like a bunch of smart contracts and optimism for like hustlers. And yeah, there's a whole bunch of cool stuff. There's like
And
some merch. I have like
the aesthetics of Dope War, not just the sound, but also the look. Like it's a really like the ecosystem looks nice. The
yeah, I think
assets
it,
looks nice.
yeah.
It's a nice universe.
Yeah, there we had a very talented, like some very talented people. So it's interesting that the types of people that show up to a project like this, like where they just have like intrinsic like interest in it and motivation to contribute to it. And a lot of them are like, you know, like for them, it's like a creative outlet. Like we had this guy, Faces of ETH, and he's still very active in the ecosystem. Who's an incredibly talented designer um, and like was working at the time, you know, in traditional like Web 2 industry as well. But like Dope was like his like, you know, very resonated with him. And there's a bunch of people like that that came into the ecosystem and just contributed like very high quality stuff. And one of them was a Parama. So if people don't know, Parama was like one of the like very early OGs in the StarkNet ecosystem, and did a lot of like trailblazing and you know, through parameters notes, like described a lot of, you know, it's kind of like I was just thinking this morning. It's like with Cairo 1.0, it's like happening again. Where like people are starting to put out these blog posts of like, what is this Cairo 1.0 thing? Like kind of like how Parama put out the notes of like, what is like Cairo back, you know, last year October or whatever. But anyways, but yeah, Parama came to the Dope Boys, came to the Dope Boys Discord, and it's like, hey, like I want to recreate a version of the classic Dope Wars calculator game on StarkNet. Um, and we're like, that's an amazing idea. At the time, I'd heard of StarkNet, hadn't really dug into it much. And he started, you know, incredibly productive, like just started building out what's called Roll Your Own, which is the StarkNet, which is a recreation of like, is the game engine for like a recreation of Dope Wars and with like quite extensible, which I think like served, you know, as a really foundational piece of the StarkNet gaming ecosystem, and was maybe the reason a lot of people have gotten involved subsequently. Like I know, like the Loot team took a lot of inspiration from Parama's work. But yeah, anyways, like he came to Dope's ecosystem. He was like, I want to build it. Like we had the DAO we funded. We actually collaborated with StarkNet in funding some grants for Parama to contribute or to like fund like the research and development of the Roll Your Own. And then I was, you know, involved with that as well. And that kind of, through that experience, I started to realize, you know, like how interesting StarkNet is for gaming. So that's like really, you know, what came to this moment of how I came to this moment of like, you know, building blockchain games on StarkNet and having like conviction of like, this is like the right
Interesting.
uh, place to do it, was like through this whole like
It's like a
series of events.
tornado came and picked you up in a park when you were bored and then took you on a whirlwind of playing an NFT and getting involved with a crazy community, which, by the way, sometimes I think for a lot of people, it's still not clear what is the value of NFTs. And that's fine. They'll have time to figure it out. But I often see people saying, oh, NFTs are all bullshit and it's just Ponzi's and whatnot. And I think a lot of it is. But
Mm-hmm.
people tend to forget that for all the noise and the useless thing that were created, there were also a lot of very interesting collaborative effort and interesting project that emerged, just like you described, where people got together, collaborated, and managed to build something out of nothing. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's there's definitely a big plus here of things that have happened that wouldn't have happened otherwise. But
100%. Yeah.
and so this took you, and then eventually it got you into, interesting. So what is StarkNet? And like, how did you go from there to Cartridge?
Yeah. So, I mean, as part, we were building out Roll Your Own. And this was like, you know, so early on, like it was before events were even on StarkNet. And, you
Yeah,
and
we tend to forget these times. Yeah, I remember when I joined, around when after I joined, we started getting the Cisco, where in a contract you could get the address of the contract who was calling that contract, and like a lot of it, when you look at it back now, you're like, how did people make this thing work? Now I
yeah,
remember that at the time there was a specific kind of contract that you would write that you would write that would basically, when you call them, they would return their address. And so they would be called selfie contracts, so that the contract would be aware of its own address, so that you could reuse it in your application. So people find ways. But yeah, I
Yeah.
remember when events were not a thing yet.
Yeah, we actually for dope wars we were or for roll your own, we're storing the entire game state struct on chain, which like obviously is a terrible idea, but like because you had no way of like emitting information out of the smart contract, so it was kind of
Yep.
the only way to do it. But yeah, like through that I was like, okay, like this I think like is incredibly interesting. I can like we can build out something really cool with roll your own, but like no one's going to be able to play it. And so like that really what led us started leading us down the avenue of building Cartridge, of like both like this idea, like having conviction that like blockchain gaming, and in particularly on-chain gaming, which enables like a whole bunch of new interesting things um, outside of just like asset ownership that a lot of other ecosystems are focused on, mostly a lot due to like the constraints that they have. Is going to be like something that's different and powerful. There's like a lot of like interesting indie game developers like working on top of StarkNet, like experimenting with what that looks like. There needs to be some way, like someone who's focused on making it so players can find those indie games, like helping support the creation of the ecosystem. There's naturally, like in the blockchain space, like a lot of horizontal components to these things, right? Like if as soon as you start to talk about like interoperability and composability, there's like these are horizontal concerns that not every single game will should like worry about implementing, or like like
It's
the path.
plumbing.
Yeah, a lot of it is plumbing, and a lot of it is also value propositions for like the user. Like the player doesn't necessarily want like one of the powerful things like today, right? If I play Halo on the Xbox and then I go and play World of Warcraft, or then I go and play League of Legends, all of those are different ecosystems with different identities that like you've maybe built up a reputation over time, but there's no way for you to like own that, and like it's not portable between those. And I think like players, like me in particular, like I've done a lot of I played a lot of games in my lifetime, and all of that history is kind of lost. And I think like it would be really cool for me personally, like selfishly, if I had the ability to, have an identity that still like represented all of those things that I've done. Like, oh, okay, I did like, I was playing like CS 1.6. I was finding scrimmages on like IRC when I was like 13 years old, or like I was building like surf maps in Counter Strike, or I was raiding Molten Core in like World of Warcraft, or like back in the day, like these like very nostalgic moments that were very important to me growing up in my childhood. Like it would be really cool if I had a way of seeing those all, right? And so I think that's a powerful value proposition to the user, and something that the blockchain enables is to have this portable identity across like different games and applications. So not only like does it help the developer to provide that infrastructure for like player identity and building out these profiles, but like for the user themselves, like user or players themselves, they will want to play with the cartridge controller because of this value proposition. I mean, they could still choose to have a different wallet for every single game if they wanted to, but like they're gonna you would want, in my opinion, you would want like to rather play with the cartridge controller, so you can capture that like value and be able to take it into the future with you. So there's naturally all these different pieces that I think make sense to build out in a horizontal way. And so that's a lot of what we're focusing on with Cartridge today, is just kind of like through that realization of building dope wars and seeing all the other interesting stuff happening in the ecosystem, the need for this to facilitate the creation of the ecosystem, and allow people to take advantage of like the kind of like the value propositions that the like blockchain and StarkNet bring to the table.
Really nice. Well, I met somebody last week who is working on verifying TLS sessions in Cairo. So maybe one day you'll be able to import your stream profile in Cartridge. Who knows? You'll be able to verify that your profile was indeed, this is what your profile, this is what stream says your profile is,
Mm,
and use a storage
interesting.
proof for that. I don't know,
Yeah.
random
Yeah.
thoughts, but it'd be fun. Cool. So can you talk a bit about the tools you guys are building at Cartridge? You focused a lot on the App Store for developers. I know you built the Web10 sign-in process. Are there other
Mhm.
projects you're working on and are excited about?
Yeah, I mean, so like right now, the things that we've been pushing on is the cartridge controller, which is like the WebAuthn stuff, and starter packs. And so this, we did like a mint recently called Non-Fungible Football before the World Cup, where we prototyped. Where this was on mainnet, StarkNet, where we issued 800 NFTs that represented, like uh, people players on teams in the World Cup. You would get randomly assigned, like Argentina or France or whatever, and it was just for fun. But it was, a big part of it was that we were testing some of the infrastructure of starter packs and the cartridge controller. One of the challenges right now with WebAuthn is it's a very new standard, and all of the industry like giants like Apple and Microsoft and Google are behind it, but like the support across the devices is still catching up. So what we wanted to see, how all of that shook out. So, anyways, like we've been focused on cartridge controller with starter packs, so getting people involved in games, and then we have like a questing system that we've implemented for on-chain quests, like doing things like inside of the smart contract and rewarding players for that. That we're working with different games to start integrating. And then I would say, you know, one of the challenges right now, like candidly in the StarkNet ecosystem, obviously, is like the transition that we're going through with the regenesis is going to, it's hard to
Mhm.
invest a lot in writing Cairo, like 010 logic today when we know that we're going to, have to transition it to Cairo 1.0. So I think like the next couple months, we've been working a little bit with Lord of Few from or Loaf from the Realms team and Sylve, and there's a group of us that have been looking at what are, now that we've all built games on StarkNet, like what are some of the different things that we can build out to make building games on StarkNet easier.
Yeah.
So like there's like ECS systems which are very fundamental to a lot of gaming engines of how you represent an architecture, like architect kind of games, especially in a way that's like easily extensible and composable. What that looks like today in Cairo, how that would be useful to games like Realms and Dope Wars and stuff like that, and then like what that looks like in Cairo 1.0. And so I think like a lot of our efforts now are going to probably be focused more on building for the future, which is like the future is like what, 6 months from now, hopefully. Um, and so like when Cairo 1.0 is around and StarkNet is going into beta, and we're in a position to start like onboarding more players and more people interested in developing games, and they don't have to kind of go through like so many, like such an obstacle course to start developing games, that will be ready then with a lot of tooling and infrastructure to try and make it easy for people to start doing these things on top of StarkNet. So that's kind of so yeah, focusing more on the game developer tooling and infrastructure, and working in collaboration and kind of dogfooding it with like the existing participants in the ecosystem, taking the things that we plan to make that easily accessible.
So a follow-up question to that is, right now there are a lot of people um, developing games on StarkNet. Are they blockchain developers trying to develop a game, or are they game developers trying to develop on blockchain?
I think that's a great question. I think it's definitely a combination. I would say, yeah, it's definitely like indie developers. Like we don't see, a lot of the existing blockchain gaming ecosystem has kind of gone the path of more top down, right? Like you have like a big business development division, and they're trying to get like these AAA studios to incorporate some blockchain logic, and mostly it's around asset ownership. So you have like Immutable and Polygon pushing a lot on this, and then you have like game development studios where they don't really want to. They don't see like blockchain development as a core competency of theirs, and they'll just like outsource, like, okay, help us help a user custody an asset, usually in a custodial way, like help a user mint an asset and then like trade an asset. And those are like the three, like the three different components of the blockchain that they really interact with. What we see on StarkNet is definitely much more blockchain native game developers, where they see, like writing Cairo code and understanding decentralized systems and understanding like the constraints of the ecosystem and what's necessary to build like fair games, or build like hidden information, stuff like that, as like a core competency of the team. And maybe in certain regards, you know it is lacking sometimes in like traditional game development experience. But at the same time, because there's so much new things that are enabled, like have like an open mindset of experimentation to try and figure out like what really makes sense for blockchain games. So I think that's like how I would characterize like StarkNet, the gaming ecosystem today.
Interesting. From what you're saying, it's kind of a new breed of game developers who need to have a bit of both competencies at their fingertip. Doesn't sound like a lot of people, but in building interesting stuff.
Yeah, and I think like it's going to take like the Trailblazers, like Guilty and the Realms team, and there's a lot of other interesting on-chain gaming work being done by, like, for example, like Dark Forest and the Lattice team and stuff like that. It's going to take like it's so early and so nascent. It's going to be like very experimental. It's going to be like people like trying new things that are interesting. Like there's the kind of skeuomorphic, just like we take from the existing, gaming ecosystem, and we just say asset ownership, which I think is like an interesting value proposition that is uniquely enabled by blockchain. But like, I think there'll be like new game mechanics that are thought up, and like blockchain native games and worlds that are going to be built um, over the next few years. And like the types of people working on that need to be a little bit more experimental and less
Yeah.
constrained.
Let's say I'm a young dev. I just went out of, studying whatever I studied, and I love video games and I love blockchain. I know how it works. How do I get started contributing to that ecosystem or building stuff in that ecosystem? Should I talk with people? Should I start
Mm-hmm.
coding? Where do I go?
Yeah, I mean, I think like that's part of the challenge today is it's not particularly approachable, and that's one of the things that, like I mentioned, we want to try and make improve on in the next few months, as like we have a better idea of what exactly like the ecosystem will look like. I think like the best place specifically for StarkNet today is to just start getting hop in like the Telegram or the Discord. Sylve is like a massive, like a great um, connector in the ecosystem. If I'm happy to chat with people. I can connect them with people. Like check out, you can like roll your own code base is a little bit like old now, and we're planning to rebuild it with Cairo 1.0 in the next few months. But the Realms has a great code base. You can check out like the stuff that Topology has been doing. You kind of have to, go a little bit into the weeds right now. There's not like a great like maybe there should be like an awesome StarkNet gaming kind of repo with links to different documentation and code base and stuff like that. Maybe it's something we can help create. But yeah, like right now, you kind of have to just go off the deep end. But if
But
you're
it's
listening
fun.
to
It is
this, and
cool.
yeah, it's super fun. It's a lot of fun.
It's not for the
It's a
faint
great
of
place
heart,
to
but it's
be.
cool.
Yeah, yeah. You almost want to select for the people that are willing to do that, like so early on in the ecosystem, right?
You don't have to
Um,
select for these kind of people. The process will auto select, to be honest.
yeah, yeah,
Until we get
yeah.
to a more comfortable place and people are more familiar with these concepts. Because like to me, it's not necessarily about, installing the tools or programming the things. Is that these are legitimately new primitives we're playing with, and
Hmm.
assembling them into interesting games is non-trivial. And it's non-trivial because you need to know these primitives, their limits, why they're interesting, so that you make something that is really interesting with it. Associated to that, I'm curious. So I've been thinking a little bit about blockchain gaming. one advantage traditional gaming has over blockchain gaming is that the code for when you have a persistent world in a video game, the code for that persistent world most of the time is hidden to players. So we
Mm-hmm.
can infer how the world works, and people play with their human skills where they figure things out and they adapt. In the blockchain world, the code of your game is visible by everyone. And so once you know how things work, it's much easier to automate. And my question is twofold. First of all, do you think that humans can have fun playing blockchain games when everything can be automated by a bot? And second is, do you think we'll see the emergence of a new industry, or not an industry, but a new vertical? You know, we had the pay to play or play to earn. Do you think we'll get code to play? Video games you don't play by playing, but you play by
Mm-hmm.
coding.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So to your first question, I mean, I think like this is like kind of an existential question, not only just to blockchain games, but to traditional games as well, with like advances in like neural networks and stuff like that. Like any game becomes bottable. Like, before you would have to like potentially interact with a game at a low level. And then you could have like anti-cheat detection systems that would be able to detect like that you're, you know, interacting at like the kernel level with the game's binaries or whatever, and they could flag you as like someone that's using some kind of name bot or something, right? But now with like neural networks, you can fully just simulate a human, right? Like you can like just at like the most fundamental level of just like the input level, right? Like simulate like the mouse clicks and stuff like that. Like it just ingests the video off the screen. It runs a neural network.
Yeah.
It makes some kind of decision. And it's impossible. It would be basically impossible to decide that someone on another screen is not cheating, right? So I think like the solution to it is probably going to be around like reputation, right? It's going to have to be that people build up some reputation over time by interacting with games and stuff like that. Build up like a personality of like how they interact with games. That you could maybe use a machine learning module to like detect like anytime that changes, it goes like out of the distribution. Um, and then like there's something at stake, right? So like if you built up a player reputation over time playing, like poker, let's say, for example, or you see it almost, you see it kind of in chess, right? Like
Yeah,
now.
that's what I was gonna say. Chess has been ruined by AI a few decades ago, but doesn't keep people from playing and people from having fun playing chess. So,
Well,
an
yeah,
advantage.
I know and I think chess is the most popular it's ever been, right? Like, from
Probably.
just like in the absolute term of like people watching chess on Twitch, maybe not relatively, but like it's like the number of people that are watching chess and stuff like that
Fair
is probably
enough.
like
No, you're
close to
right.
all time high. Um,
But
but yeah,
chess
so
is inherently analog, right? You don't have to use a computer to play chess. So, in a way, if you're playing, I don't know, it feels like it's easier to prove that you're not cheating with chess.
if you're
But
in
it's much
person.
harder with a computer. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you could say the same thing about a game, even if it's on the blockchain. If you're playing like a 1v1 game next to each other, then like you can be sure
Fair
the
enough.
person's not
Fair enough.
cheating, right?
If I'm doing a LAN at home, it's easier to check that the guy is not cheating. You're right.
But yeah, I mean, I think like yeah, definitely like it'll it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, there's games now. This game, a lot of people play games just for their own pure joy, right? And so the fact, like, if a game is in a competitive context and people are botting, and there's no way to weed them out, then obviously it ruins the experience of other people. If like maybe the solution is like if you're playing a multiplayer game, you have like players with reputation that you have like some, Twitter has the same problem, right? Like
Yeah.
you have like some kind of heuristic for deciding whether someone's like a honest player of the game and is playing it for fun and not like, just to extract value. And then you build like a lobby with those players to play against each other. And if someone is caught, like through some kind of mechanism, then they lose everything, right? So there has to be some kind of consequence, and so we'll have to figure out what those structures look like. But yeah, and then there's also the kind of experimentation that topology is doing with Mumu. I don't know if you guys have seen Mumu, which is quite interesting experiment.
I haven't seen it yet.
What is the URL? But yeah, you can check it out on Guilty's Twitter or Topology, which is like a single player game on the blockchain. To kind of build these state machines that do these different operations. And so you could bot that, but what are you really achieving through it? It's hard to say. But yeah, and then to your second question, I think that's, in my opinion, the most interesting thing that is enabled by the blockchain is just this collaborative building of worlds, right? So when you have this permissionless ecosystem that can run on top of a blockchain and is kind of perpetual and doesn't need a particular or some centralized party to decide to operate it, you create this ability for this emergent ecosystem to emerge where everyone can kind of contribute, how it's happened in DeFi, for example, to this, a lot of people calling it autonomous worlds or internal games, this set of this alternate reality that has its own rule set that lives on chain perpetually, and people can contribute to it, and you can contribute maybe at the primitive level, today the game starts and you can burn some wood and make some food or whatever, and then someone else introduces some logic that says now you can burn some wood and generate electricity or something, right?
Yeah.
And the ability for people to contribute these things, and then to potentially build different views of this world that lives in the blockchain, and then monetize it through blockchains. Obviously, the first thing they do is transfer value. So the ability for people to create things for other people to consume, which is obviously there's a lot of the biggest games today, like Minecraft or Roblox, are all around content creation and people creating these mini games and contributing to them. The ability to do that at a very fundamental level, permissionlessly, without any worry about publisher rugging you in the future, will, I think, eventually create these very collaborative world building exercises where a lot of people will, the fun that they will get out of it. A lot of people write code for fun or build games for fun. That is, in a sense, the game, right? They're contributing to the game. So I think the meta game. So yeah, I think that will, in my opinion, definitely be something that will emerge eventually for blockchain games. Once we've got the tooling to a good enough spot that you don't have to, manage the AP pointer to do something.
Yeah, don't worry too much about the plumbing. Focus on the game.
Yeah, exactly. So
really cool.
I think it'll be, yeah.
Cool. Tarrence, on these good words, I want to thank you for spending time with us today. This was a really insightful conversation. So thanks a lot. Where do people find you?
You can find me, primarily on Twitter, Tarrence, VATARRENCEVA, or at cartridge.gg is where we're building out the Cartridge gaming ecosystem, and generally just in the StarkNet ecosystem. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Have a good day. Cheers.
Yeah, you too. Bye.